Good evening. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming. I know it's spring break and it's a quiet time of year and it's beautiful outside. So it's a lot to ask people to give up this beautiful evening to be here tonight. I'm Amy Turner. I'm the CEO of Fox Islands Electric and Fox Islands Wind. I'm going to introduce Patrick Trainer. He's our president for the Fox Islands Electric Board. And then we have some directors online as well that are attending. And then the Fox Islands Wind Board, George Kendrick, our president, Doug Green, our vice president, and Chuck Gadzik is our secretary treasurer. So thank you for coming tonight. We are excited to talk about our energy requirements and projections. We've had a lot of meetings, but this really is our foundation. How much energy do we need? What do we need now? Where are we going? This is all about our load study. Let's see if I can get it. So long-term load or demand forecasting is basically the basis for our generation system planning investment. It's where we ask these questions. Oops, need a little more cord this way. Where do we get our power? How much power do we need? How much do we need based on the time of year? How much do we need based on the time of day? What does that look like overall? When do we need that power? How much power are we going to need in the future? Where will we get that power in the future? How much generation should we own? How do we manage the resources that we have? How do we manage the resources that we need to acquire in the future? It's a huge picture where you're really looking at all these different variables. So we thought this is a good place to start tonight. It is both the culmination and the basis for pretty much every meeting that we've had so far. And it'll be the basis for the meetings going forward. So as we look at this, there we go. We are also considering not just where we're at right now, but where we're going. The transition that we're making as a society to electric power vehicles, installing heat pumps, induction stove, other household appliances that might have previously run on fossil fuels, increased reliance on electricity for work and life functions, the different equipment that we use, how we've changed in the past 100 years from a lot of manual work to machine equipment, what runs on electricity, what runs on fossil fuels. What is that transition going to look like in the next 10, 20, 30 years? Looking at our island, just our island in general, island development, the modernization here. There are different entities that are looking at electrification of harbors and the introduction of not just fossil fuel boats that we already serve and already have the infrastructure for, but what are we going to need for electric powered boats? And what kind of infrastructure would be needed to accommodate that piece? And then we're also looking at the impacts to the entire New England electric grid, because we are an island, but we're really not when it comes to, you know, they say no man is an island. Well, we really actually are. But when we look at our grid, we have to look at New England as a whole. We need to be looking at the added transmission for all of the new projects that are going on the mainland, because we're part of that. And we have to pay for pieces of that and our use of that. We need to look at New England overall, the load growth, new housing, new businesses. Data centers are really a critical factor of power use and how our system needs to serve customers in the future. Data centers going up that are necessary for Google, for all of our online systems, just our huge uses of electricity. Industrial sector growth. Where's the mainland going? How are they powering? We are a piece of that. Do we want to be customers of that? How do we do it? Do we do it and keep pushing to energy independence on the island? These are all questions that we have to answer. And to answer these questions, we really have to start with, where are we? How much energy do we use? How much will we need? When are we going to need it? And how we're going to put those things together. So right now, in 2023, we received just 13 megawatt hours from our diesel generator, and this is just backup power. From Fox Islands wind was about 40% of our energy, and the energy market was 60% of our energy. Fox Islands wind had a rough year last year with all of the outages. These numbers are usually reversed. Usually, and I'm hoping this year we're more on track for this, taking care of the maintenance and some of the equipment that had broken in the turbines. We are now on track to actually be more of that 55–60% Fox Islands wind, and then 40–45% from the energy market. Fox Islands wind was sized for 100% of our energy use, but it's never provided 100% because it's intermittent source. So when it's not blowing, we have to buy energy from the market. When there's too much being produced, we have to sell that extra energy. So it's never been without energy storage 100% of our load. Last year was a very difficult year. We have addressed a lot of issues mechanically, and we think this year is going to be much better on track. But again, our two main sources are market power and the Fox Islands wind power. So to talk about that as a starting place and where we're going, I'm going to pass it over to George to talk about more of our base load and forecasting projections.
Okay, thanks, Amy. So this chart that's up here on the screen, Amy showed a version of this, I think it's 2 or 3 meetings ago. And basically, it's looking at our system load over the course of a year. So the months are across the bottom, January through December. And the commercial customers, which are on the bottom here, are pretty consistent throughout the year. And residential customers, including seasonal residents, make up most of the increase that we see in the summertime. And then the co-op breaks out peak information, peak time of day information. So this is peak power, 5 to 8 p.m., for example, and tracks that separately. And it's very instructive to look at this, to see the yellow, which is the peak period, surges in the summertime when we have a surge in people on the island. And between 5 and 8 p.m., when everybody's home, they're making dinner, they're doing laundry, we see a dramatic surge. So let's go to the next slide. If you take the sum of all of those and we just turn it into a line, let's go there. So there's the peak demand, month by month. Now let's compare it to our generation. So the blue area here shows our average wind power generation over the last 15 years compared to the demand curve in orange. And you can see, we've talked about this in previous meetings, the wind generation tends to peak in the wintertime and tends to drop in the summer when it's not quite as windy. We've also seen a decrease in wind generation over the last couple of years due to the age of the turbines and some maintenance issues that Amy referred to. And we're hoping to get back to a much higher generation this year. But the bottom line is the turbines are aging, so they're not going to produce quite as well as they did when they were brand new. The breezes in the summertime that drop off are an unfortunate reality. We can't do much about that. And the summer, unfortunately, is when we see the biggest demand. So you can see that we have quite a gap between the wind power production in the summertime and the demand in the summertime. And we have to make up that difference by buying power from the grid. And then delivering it through our underwater cable, which results in line losses. And we talked a little bit about that 3 meetings ago, maybe 2 meetings ago, I can't remember which meeting it was, about how we lose 6 to 7% in each direction. So if we're selling power to the mainland, that we generate and we have extra power we're trying to sell to the mainland, we end up losing 6% of that, simply not friction, but a resistance going through the line underwater. And when we buy power from the mainland, we lose through resistance 6 to 7%, or maybe it's even higher than that. I'm not sure the total.
It's right around there. Some months it's up near 9%.
Oh gosh!
But I think the average is 6 to 8, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Just a quick footnote. Earlier days before this new cable, I think it was around 18 to 20%.
Yeah. Okay. So things are better. They're a little bit.
It's better.
better.
They're a little bit better.
Some of us do 420, either way.
So bottom line is that we end up losing some power
Yeah.
through the lines when we have to buy from the mainland. So this is how the wind generation is coming close to, in the wintertime, meeting our demand, but not in the summertime. Now, the next slide shows that last month we talked about a potential solar project on the island. And if we added the project that we had described, and not that we're going to absolutely move forward in that direction, it was a hypothetical model, but it was putting a 1.4 megawatt solar project on the landfill on Vinyl Haven. It's about a 5-acre site. It's a logical spot to put one if one is going to put a solar project out here, but there's many, many steps and thoughts and economics involved before we go forward with something like that. But just as an exercise, here's what the generation from that project would add to our generation. So in yellow is the solar. And you can see in the summertime, and the springtime in particular, we would do quite well. It would more than meet the demand. And if we had a battery, we could store the extra power or we could sell it to the mainland. But in the summertime, we'd come closer to meeting the demand, but still not quite there because we have such a surge in summer residents coming in and in peak demand in the summer. Of course, this is just a broad monthly view. So as we talked about last month with solar, your demand in the peak time in the evening is not when you're generating the most amount of solar energy. So with a battery, you could store the power that you generated in the morning or at noontime for use later on. But without a battery, we still have a shortfall.
You said you're talking about demand right now, this graph in 2023.
Correct.
But as we go on, that white gap is going to go in the wrong direction.
Stay tuned, Addis.
Okay, very good.
So this suggests that increasing the generation on the islands could go a long way towards meeting that demand gap that we have in the summertime and reduce our need to buy power from the mainland. But here's another important thing to look at. This is the actual sales in the co-op over the last 12 years. And we're currently in the range of delivering about 10.5 million kilowatt hours to our customers each year. And we've seen about a 1% growth per year since 2010. So this is demand, basically. It's how we're meeting demand with these sales. And you can see a couple of dips in here. The lower demand in 2020 was due to COVID kicking in, and a whole bunch of seasonal houses were not occupied that summer. A bunch of people did stay home at their primary residences. But then you look at 2021 and there was a little blip as we ended up with a whole bunch of seasonal houses being occupied longer than normal during COVID. But if we look at that 2022 and 2023, things return back to their normal growth pattern, and it looks like about 1% per year. So if we look ahead, and if we just do a simple projection along that trend line of a 1% per year, and we extend it over the next decade, we'll need to come up with about 12 billion kilowatt hours instead of 10.5. That's about a 15% increase over today. And keep in mind, this is a very simple extrapolation. This does not dive into detailed analysis of how many heat pumps are being installed on the island. Is the ferry, the new ferry, 10 years from now, actually going to be a hybrid or going to need recharging, when it comes here? We don't even talk about electric cars, any of that. This is simply taking the last 12 to 15 years pattern and extrapolating it. But it's a place to start. It's at least one place where we can look at. So if we go back to the monthly demand chart, the simple line, the yellow was the one that we were looking at today. And the red is the projection with this 15% increase by 2034. Now let's take a look again at how generation would meet the future demand. So again, here's the demand curve in red, projected out 15% increase. We could argue whether that's a conservative extrapolation and it should be higher than that, but we'll talk a little bit about how we might be able to mitigate higher growth by thinking about conservation in a few situations here and there. Whether that's even possible is another topic, but that's what we got to meet. So if we come up to looking at the current wind generation, which again is in blue, this is the same curve that we showed before. The gap between generation and demand, particularly in the summer, is even wider than it is today. And this assumes that the turbines remain in place.
I was just gonna say, we're gonna get new turbines to some degree, and they will be more efficient.
Well, we'll talk about that, but that's not a given. Okay. So one of the things I said when I came on this board, you know, we're going to make the most rational, economically sensible decision going forward as a community. And if that means repowering turbines and upgrading, great. If it means disassembling, demobilizing, if that's the right economic decision, and if that's what the community wants, that may be the direction we go. But we need to talk through, understand, become educated about what the options are, what the pros and cons of each option are, what the costs are going to be, and then make a decision together as to what makes the most sense.
George, from Zoom land, repeat the questions said by the audience.
Oh, thank you. Okay. The question, Banner, you want to say that again?
Just on the assumption there will be new turbine machinery as it wears out.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So does this graph reflect?
Yeah, yeah. So the question was, you know, assuming that we're going to repower the turbines, you know, and increase their output, does this graph match that? And so the answer really to that question is this blue line on here reflects the current turbines, that we keep them in place and we repair them for as long as possible to continue generating power. And assuming that they will continue to generate the power that we've an average generation over the last 10 to 12, 15 years. There's a lot of ifs in that, but for the purposes of this study, to look at what's the demand going to look like versus what we can generate, it's a place to start. So the blue is our current wind generation. Now let's add the projected solar project, the hypothetical solar project that we talked about last month, 1.4 megawatts, and that looks a little bit better, at least in the springtime. And in the summer, we'll come a little bit closer, but we still have that big gap during peak time in summer. So if we had a battery, you know, we could probably help out a lot, because again, this chart is looking at months, not hours of the day, and things fluctuate during the day. Solar is generated in the daytime. Our wind power is better in the evening, at nighttime in the wintertime, but not in the summer. So there's a whole bunch of detail that we have to drill into here. But even with a battery, it looks like we wouldn't be able to meet this 2034 demand with the current wind turbine array. So let's go to the next one. So we're still gathering information on the potential options for replacing or upgrading the turbines. And with more efficient components. And we'll be talking about that in a future meeting, what we know thus far and what the options might be. But it's worth taking a quick look at what that might mean in terms of meeting demand. So preliminary info that we have so far suggests that if we replace just the nacelles and the blades, so that's called repowering, with modern, more efficient models, we can increase the generation by 25%. Now, some manufacturers are talking 30 to 40% increase. I tend to be conservative, and I would much rather look at the lower potential here as we run our economic models, and treat anything above that as gravy. But let's just assume 25%. So this blue chart assumes repowering of the nacelles, which is basically the gearbox and the generator, and more efficient blades. And that demand curve in red, which again is the projected 2034 demand, would be met easily in the wintertime and the springtime and in the fall. We still have a gap in the summertime, however, because we can't do anything about the wind itself. The wind doesn't blow, we can't generate power. Jim,
Just a graphic exercise, I want to make sure I'm doing this right. Disregarding line losses for a minute. If we could somehow scrape the blue that's above the red and scrape that out and put it into white. And fill that white,
If-
basically we're meeting the needs.
that would be fabulous if we could store power for 3 months.
That's a storage.
But battery systems that we have today are generally designed for multiple hours of storage, not multiple days, weeks, or months of storage. So that's one of the biggest challenges is if you generate extra power, what do you do with it?
Sell it.
You sell it or you store it. And it makes sense to store it. It makes sense to store it if you're going to be needing it in a few hours. Like if you're generating in the morning or at noontime when prices are cheap, but the demand is higher in the evening when everybody's cooking dinner, it's only a few hours. We could save that power and use it later. But here, if it's generated in March and we really need it in July, we can't save it.
Right, but so my question was again, or comment was ignoring the line losses and also the fact that we sell it for cheaper than we buy it from the back, just in terms of kilowatt hours. It looks like, I mean, if we were truly getting a one-to-one through the market, it looks like
Yes.
it would meet the needs.
It would. So the question is, with this graph, it looks like we'd meet the need, primarily except for in the summertime. If we kind of scrape and save the extra, it means that other than in the summertime, we could store enough from the wind power to use during our peak period, and then just provide with wind power the rest of the time, pretty much throughout the year, except for during that high peaking. This white area in the summertime, what we would probably do if we had a battery, we could charge the battery in the middle of the night and use it when we primarily needed it from like 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night. So we would still be purchasing net power from the market, but we'd be doing it at a much lower cost if we had a battery.
Yep.
So the battery would go a long way to close that gap. But through the rest of the year, we would be selling pretty much daily, we'd be selling wind power into the market.
You got a question there.
Mhm.
And does that net out, Jim's question, that the revenues from the blue above the red line equal the cost of the white below the red line?
It would depend. So with the battery, the question is, would it net out? Would the cost of the market power equal the cost of what we're selling into? Right now, that answer is no, but it's mostly no because we can't buy and sell at optimal times. With the battery, you can do things like energy triage, where if the wind is blowing and the market has a really high price, it's paying a high price for power, we could actually use our battery to serve our system and sell that power into the mainland to make money during that time, and also to provide the mainland with power that the market needed, and then charge it in the middle of the night when there's extra. So with the battery, you can kind of choose how you purchase, how you sell it, what times of the day that make the most financial sense. Right now, we really can't do that. We pretty much always sell at a loss and buy replacement backup power at a much more expensive rate. We lose about 5 cents on every kilowatt hour that we have to sell and replace.
So, sorry.
So there's, once upon a time, we sold our power for more than what we were generating for. The state of Massachusetts is very fierce to get our green credits. That's no longer the case.
Well, actually, we do get revenue from our renewable energy credits that we sell.
That was more than what I remember it, than what we
So-
were producing it for. Some 0.5 cents. What it was once upon a time.
So right now we get 3.9 cents
No.
per no.
Bang.
Yes. Well, there's a lot more renewable energy on the market. So there's a lot more providers for those renewable energy credits. So we're not getting the higher cost that we used to receive.
Good old days ago.
Well,
Well-
they might come back.
It was fun.
They just look different.
I see a question over there.
I think you answered it.
Okay, this is if we repowered and upgraded the wind turbines. Let's go to the next one. This is with the solar project, the same one we've been talking about. And you can see we've come a lot closer in the summertime because that's when solar is peaking its generation and when wind is dropping. And the little, it even is more power that one could sell in the winter and springtime with a solar project. So I think that for me, this is an interesting chart because it suggests that we could meet the full demand without having to buy as much mainland power if we were able to go in this direction. Now, we have to look at the economics to see if this all makes sense. But from just a simple generation meeting demand perspective, just looking at electrons, this might do it. But this all brings us back to what the cost of power is for all of us who are in the co-op. So let's look at the next one. So Amy shared this chart a few meetings ago, and it looked at the what if scenario if buying all of our power from ISO New England, from the mainland, instead of having the wind farm. So again, this is if the wind farm didn't exist, what would the actual cost be? Sorry, what would the ISO New England power costs, which are in red, versus what did it actually cost us all by having the wind farm in blue? And it suggests that our costs were at least comparable over that time period, and even slightly lower for a period of time when the turbines were running, very efficiently instead of having to buy mainland power. But there's another factor to consider, and that's the line losses. So this chart shows the total power that the co-op purchased from the wind farm and from the mainland since 2010. So this is all the power that the electric co-op has purchased. And in 2022 was 11.9 million kilowatt hours. Next one. But because of line losses going through the transmission line, only 10.5 million kilowatt hours were actually delivered to customers. So we had to buy 11.9, lost it through the transmission line, and we were able to deliver 10.5 million. So that power lost is 1.4 million kilowatt hours. That's equivalent to 230 typical households in the Fox Islands total annual electricity that they use. So 230 full annual consumption, 230 households is what we lost coming through the transmission line. So that's a lot of power lost. Well, now,
Just for the sake of how many total households does Fox Island Electric serve? Peak season.
We have 2,100 meters, but that includes fishing houses and things. I think residential, we're right at 1,536 residential houses. So 230
15%,
represents,
give or take 15%.
right. So and that's a lot of power, and it suggests that we might be better off generating as much power as we can on the island in whatever way makes the most sense, rather than increasing purchases from the mainland. Don't forget, we've got a 15% increase, a conservative increase estimate of what our demand will be in 10 years. Do we make that up by just buying more power from the mainland? Or do we try and figure out ways to generate more on the island? And then there's the conservation element to think about too. So when we look at all of our generation options, figuring out what makes the most sense financially is what we're going to be focusing on in the months ahead, and then sharing with all of you, trying to understand what our options are, what are the most logical steps going forward, and what do we all think about that? So, James.
With that comment, George, is one of the options that I don't think I know we've talked around it. One of the options to lobby harder to change the law in Maine so that those who can afford to put private PV panels up do that and have a way for those individuals to also support the grid. Wouldn't that, shouldn't that be on the table as one of the things to do? Because if we were generating a lot of power privately and dumping it into the grid and also supporting the grid, isn't that to our advantage?
So we should repeat the question.
So, yeah. The question is, should we be lobbying to look at ways to financially make it feasible for people to self-generate by putting rooftop solar on their houses and also feeding into the grid that way? Looking at net metering issues because it does quite a bit of money. And what it does is it does shift costs to other customers. So we talked about that last month, and I'm going to put that to the side a little bit to speak directly to the idea, if we could put rooftop solar in everyone's houses, could we use that energy to support the grid instead of doing utility size scale projects? It is an attractive option, but it's about 2 times more expensive. And it's hard to balance the power factor on your system. The more generators you put on the system, the more you need to balance the power from all of those generators. As a system operator, we can use the transmission line to balance the power, or the diesel generator through our system. We have to already balance the wind power coming into our system with that. All of the little generators that pop up the rooftop, it does become very problematic to balance all of those. Some utilities are doing that with individual batteries in homes. All of these options, they are options, but they are incredibly more expensive. I think we said
We
to
looked at that
replace the
last
1.4 megawatt, just the one solar installation that we modeled over the old landfill, we'd have to replace it with 350 roofs just to get the same capacity,
Right.
not the same power factor.
My suggestion wasn't that the co-op pay for those panels, but if you have private individuals paying for the panels and also supporting the grid on the island, wouldn't that be an advantage? My understanding is that main law right now makes it impossible for those who have private panels to support the grid. So if they had private panels generated, if they paid for it, and those for the grid, wouldn't that be the advantage of the co-op?
If we could, if private people could own them, pay for them, and support the grid, so oversize them generally, so that they supported and provided more power to the grid, it would take a law change because that power is very expensive. And we'd have to have some equipment to do that, but you're asking a lot of people to be very philanthropic.
Well, it's not real. The question was, shouldn't FIPC be lobbying to get the law changed? Would that not be an advantage?
Well, there's still, I mean, sorry if I jump in on this one, because we did talk about this last time when we ran that analysis. Right now, because net metering is in place where we have to buy whatever power is generated from a household's rooftop at a certain price.
Right.
And that payback, if you will, to the homeowner is what drives how fast they get payback for their panels. So right now it's about a 6, maybe 7 years at most payback period, which is why you see so many advertisements for putting rooftop solar up. If the law is changed so that instead of paying that high price, we're only paying, for example, whatever the market at that moment would bear, could be 3 cents a kilowatt hour if it was in the middle of the night. You're not going to be generating a lot of solar power in the middle of the night, though. But let's say you were, and you get 2 to 3 cents. Now your payback period for your rooftop solar, instead of being 6 or 7 years, could be 15 or 20 years. So it's a balancing act between how much does it cost all of us to pay our electric bills because the co-op is buying power versus how much are you saving as an individual putting rooftop solar on your house? If you have a battery and you cut yourself off from the grid and you're generating power and you're using it and you're not requesting any power from the co-op, right? You know, then your economics are your own. But that's not the case we have right now. And even if the law changes, we're still probably going to be having to buy power from generators, whether it's a rooftop generator or a wind farm or the mainland or a utility scale solar. The co-op has to buy power from somewhere and deliver it to you. So I think it's going to come down to the economics more than anything else.
Well, I think there's a bigger hardware problem. I believe I saw Elon Musk as one of the biggest batteries in the world is out in Hawaii, like 13 megawatts, like that capacity. And they said in the great state of maybe it's more now, I don't know. But anyway, in the great state of Hawaii, the system, Amy, isn't equipped to handle much more than 8 or 10% battery power on all the houses. You can't handle it.
Right.
You just can't. You generally want, but you can plug it in, but it's going to come back to you. There's just nowhere to go with it.
Yeah, the technology is evolving rapidly.
Yeah.
The costs are coming down. And right now, we don't want to be the first adopters of some brand new technology that no one has figured out yet. You know, that there's not a good track record for that. But I would say right now, from what we understand, and we'll learn a lot more in the months ahead, that the battery scale systems that we're talking about are well proven, well established. They're in place all over the country and they're running fine. And the grid can handle them and our system can handle them. So I think you're right. If you're talking about a 165 megawatt system like Hawaii is putting in, that's a whole different ballgame. If you're talking 2 or 3 that we are discussing. Okay.
I think we have a question back here.
Yes, in the handouts and slides, I don't see any charts that show how much we're purchasing from ISO New England over time and, you know, over a year, and how much we are selling to ISO New England. It seems to me the discussion about the battery is tied to those numbers, because that is what you gain and therefore afford to spend on batteries is that number. So I'd love to see some analysis of the buying and selling from ISO New England, not from, I mean, I guess in some way you have to factor in what's bought from people like me who have solar panels.
The question is that you'd like to see some of the data of the ISO New England purchases, how much we sell, how much we purchase, and what that looks like. I did provide a lot of those charts. I didn't provide them in this one, but during the battery presentation. So I will work those back into future presentation. We tend to use about 60% on average Fox Islands wind power. But the last several years, we generate 15 to I think 28% more than that we couldn't use at the time it was generated, and then we sold to ISO New England, the power market. So traditionally, we purchased about 40% of our power from ISO New England. About 20% of that we could have offset with the battery. In 2020, it cost us about $150,000 to just replace the same power that we had sold. So the next year was only $90,000. Last year was problematic because Fox Islands Wind just didn't generate what we wanted it to generate. It was only, I think, $47,000 that we lost by not being able to store it and use it when we needed it. But I definitely have those numbers and I can share them with you. We didn't include them in the presentation today.
Is that the first session?
Well, I would encourage everybody who's listening to go to the website because all of the public presentations that are there recorded, and it's a lot of good nighttime popcorn viewing. If you have trouble sleeping, absolutely. But each of the topics is recorded. It's about an hour-long video, and you can work your way through all of those.
And I'll also try to summarize some of these big data sets that we have and key concepts to put on the website. That's one of the things that we're doing, developing our new website, is really trying to get this data out there. So I will flag that. It's definitely interesting. I started comparing it a couple of years ago because I wanted to know, how much are we actually losing because we can't store our power? And does that cost that we're losing justify purchasing a battery? And right now it's an even split. The battery will cost us just as much as it will save us, which is why we're looking at grants and low interest funding and loans and things like that. Because we would want to have a net financial benefit from any of the projects that we do. We don't want to just break even. We want to actually have it make financial sense for the community.
I assume you're taking into account the line losses when you do comparison.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Okay, I think I'm going to hand this over to Doug. Doug is our vice president on the Fox Islands Wind Board to talk about just energy conservation concepts and some of the things as a community that we are looking into and that I think will be beneficial for us.
Great, thanks. So we've been talking about some pretty complicated stuff, what our energy demands are going to be going forward. What are the options for maybe meeting those demands? But there are things that, and a lot of this is common sense, and we've discussed this in the past, that we can be doing now as a community to conserve energy, to engage in energy efficiency. And while it sounds like common sense ideas, it's actually quite material. If you drill down on some of these concepts, as a community, we really can conserve energy. We can engage in energy efficiency that reduces energy demand for the island and reduces electricity rates for all of us. Just a couple of concepts. Again, this should be common sense, but if you look at some of these items, especially some of the big ticket energy consumption articles on the island, dishwashers, washers, and dryers, only use them when you're having a full load. Using some of these heavy appliances, such as, again, a dishwasher or a washer and dryer, just as much energy is used with nothing in those machines as when they are full. So it's just common sense. Energy conservation is something that we as an island want to embrace and incorporate into our daily lives. Again, it will reduce some of these demand issues that George and Amy have been discussing. Unplug electronics. How many of you tonight, before you left, and actually I did because I was going through some DOE energy websites, it's amazing how much energy you can save by unplugging plugs that you aren't using, including, for instance, your phone chargers. I had 3 plugged into the wall. I have 3 devices. I wasn't using them. I unplugged all of them. Your coffee machines, your blenders. When you aren't using these machines, but they're plugged in, as some of you know, energy is being used. There is load going through the system. So these are common sense ideas, but if incorporated into our daily habits as an island, we can really reduce load and help address some of these demand issues that we've been talking about. The same is true with energy efficiency. Amy, if you go to the next slide. There is a great website. I'm a big believer in some of the Department of Energy websites where they really drill down on some of these. And we'll add this, I think, Amy, we should give them this site. There's a DOE Energy Saver Appliances and Electronics website. You go to that and it's amazing the type of energy efficiency options that are available with respect to dishwashers, stoves, LED lighting. LED lighting, is, a lot of you know, results in using less than 70, you save 75% by using LED lighting over incandescent bulbs, and they last up to 25 years longer, 25 times longer than incandescent bulbs. So not only are you saving energy, you aren't going out and buying a lot of incandescent bulbs and the cost associated with that. Energy efficient appliances, I think, is where some material savings on energy load could be achieved. Using smaller appliances, for instance, if do you really have to use your oven in certain occasions. Can you use a microwave? Can you use a toaster oven? A lot of good ideas are provided in the DOE Energy website about how to reduce energy load and be energy efficient for some of the heavy energy consumption articles that we use on a daily basis. We also, the energyefficiencymaine.com website is also very useful in identifying options and incentives for purchasing energy efficient articles. So energy efficiency and energy management, we've discussed this, and George has identified when during the day do we have peak load? When is it most expensive for you to use electricity? It's 5 to 8 p.m. When we get home, we are cooking dinner, we're doing laundry. If you shift that use to early in the morning, later at night, not only is your rate going to be cheaper, your electricity rate going to be cheaper, it reduces load on the system as well. So there are a number of things we can be incorporating now as part of our daily habits, energy efficiency to reduce load, to reduce your rates. And it's just a lot of this, again, is common sense. It's things we know as a community, but I think it's something that can't be forgotten, that we have to try to incorporate into our daily lives now. Because again, we're going to have increased energy demand. There's no question about that. And we're going to be faced with challenges about how to meet that demand. And one of the ways to address it is to be more energy efficient and reduce our personal energy consumption. So one thing I do want, and Amy, I think you're going to address this, is the time of use billing on rate considerations is another option that we'll be evaluating going forward.
We really like to address our rate making, really look at how we're using our system, not just how many kilowatt hours we're using the system. Everybody that receives service in some way from Fox Islands Electric should be paying the fair share of that overhead cost of service. So when we look at time of use billing and demand rate, it's focused largely on how we're using the system, not necessarily how many kilowatt hours we're using. So a lot of how we're using the system is already used for billing purposes on the mainland for transmission purposes. In 2023, the peak load on the New England market was actually very much a surprise. It is almost always in July or August. That's when we have peak tourism season, and in Maine, that's when it is the warmest weather. Well, we had a New England heat wave the beginning of September this year, and we had a peak in July, and we were pretty sure that's what our billing was going to be based on. And September 7th last year, there was this New England heat wave, and it was 76 to 90 degrees, and it led to a lot of high air conditioning demand. The New England system peaked at 23,638 megawatts, and it did that in the 6 o'clock hour at night. Again, that 5 to 8 is pretty much always when our peak was. This was like at 6:18. So this 1 hour of 2023 provides the basis for ISO New England's, the energy market's capacity charge. So the capacity is pretty much, here's what we provide. Here's all of these costs in the capacity charge. How does that divide up between all the different utilities? And we divide those costs up based on how much each utility was using the system during that 1 hour of the peak time in the year. So Fox Islands Electric share at that time was 1.864 megawatts. We peak at about 2.2. So on a hot summer day in September, we don't have a lot of air conditioning here. So I'm not surprised that we were only at 1.864 megawatts. We could have been higher. I'm glad we weren't higher. So this is our percentage of the overall system load. So that translates to just about $80,000 for our annual capacity charge, which translates to $6,641 a month. This is a charge just to be connected to the transmission system. This doesn't have anything to do with how much energy we use or anything. It's just to be there, just to be a customer. This translates down to 1 cent a kilowatt hour. So for an average customer that uses about 500 kilowatt hours a month, this is a $60 a year charge for that customer. And if you use more energy, it's more of a charge for you. If you use less, it's less. But average customer, $60 to $80 a year is that share just to be part of the New England market. And this is why it makes so much sense to shift our peak. The ISO New England capacity fee in 2026 is going up 38.4%. And again, this is a charge just to be here, just to be present. So they just did a capacity market bid, and it's going up. It was in the paper about a month ago that it's going up about 38.6%. And there's different regions and everything that you kind of have to, but that's my average when I was looking at it. It's going up quite a bit in a couple of years. Part of that is there's just a lot more transmission on the market. So just being here, you're part of a much more expensive system than you were a couple of years ago. So your share of it is more expensive. Capacity is that based on that 1 hour, if we had been shifting as a community, if we've been shifting all of our laundry on the island away from the 6 o'clock hour, what difference would have made? I mean, that's speculative, but it goes exactly to what Doug is talking about. If we had been shifting our load and conserving and avoiding those peak power times, maybe this would have only been a $30 charge throughout the year. Maybe we could cut it. There was 1 year in 2021 that we had absolutely 0 kilowatt hours on the system because ISO New England had called on us to start the diesel generator. So we were using the diesel generator and it was offsetting every kilowatt hour of our load. So we had a $10 a month charge for capacity, which cost every customer 100,000th of a cent per kilowatt. I don't know. That's I'd have to get my calculator out. Don't quote me on that one. But it cost us, it took our capacity way down. Because we could avoid having that time. A lot of utilities are using batteries to shift away from this high capacity charge, this peaking power cost to save their customers money. So it's not just us. It's a system-wide, it's a market-wide approach to this. Now, if enough people shift away, if enough utilities shift away, then the market's going to have to figure out how to reorganize the market cost so that everyone is paying more an equal share. This is just how it's kind of a game of cat and mouse sometimes. How we figure out how to pay for this and what our share is, what our fair share of the system costs actually are. Yes.
So Amy, is there data from communities that have made a big effort to shift their power usage? I mean, it'd be really interesting. I know that there's like an island off the coast of Denmark. I mean, there are places that have really tried hard. What do we know about that?
The question is, are there communities who have shifted their power costs away from that peak hour? And basically, what kind of result has that happened and what we know from those? I have read quite a few battery installation white papers, and I'm trying to think of a town coming to mind. I've read a lot of these papers. There are a couple batteries. There are a couple municipalities, I believe it's Holton one, that has a large scale battery in its system. I know they have a solar array, but there are a couple utilities in Maine that have benefited from this. But across the United States, with the battery adoption, we are seeing some positive benefits. I'll have to get you some data later because I can't come to mind any, where to point you to a white paper. But it does there are great white papers that have talked about how communities have saved significant money managing their resources and managing their power use.
When you talk about large scale batteries, are you talking about simple capacity or increased storage time?
Both actually. We have looked from a 1 megawatt to a 2 megawatt and about a 4 megawatt hour duration. So basically, if we went with a 2 megawatt battery, we could provide 2 megawatts on our system for 4 hours straight. And this actually goes right into this next slide. Our backup generation plan from like 2010 to 2030, the market, we had a backup market energy to provide backup to Fox Islands wind, which was designed for 100% of our load. And then when we had outages, we had a 2 megawatt diesel generator. Initially, that was our plan. We've learned since with the intermittent power load, we actually need backup power a lot more frequently, specifically during peak times and when the wind dies down. When we're looking at today into the future, the next 20 years, we really do need backup power for Fox Islands wind and the market, because when we lose that transmission line, we cannot run the turbines with the existing technology that we have. So when we lose our transmission line today, all we have is our 2 megawatt diesel generator. And that generator is only big enough during shoulder months, the spring and the fall, when there aren't many people here on the island, where we're not at peak capacity. And we also are not relying heavily on heat pumps and fuel and lighting, or well, the fuel, sorry, fossil fuels separate from that. But when we don't have high heating months, when it's not real dark outside, so we don't have a lot of lights on. So when we have less energy needs for less people, we can provide and fully supply both islands with energy. And that only happens in the spring and the fall anymore. The last couple times, just the spring, that we have had storm conditions and we've had to run the generator, we've been able to hold the whole island and both islands. In January and February, we could not. So that high winter use or the high summer use, our generator is just not big enough anymore. So we can look at what we really need is 4 megawatt hours on the island. On one island, both islands, together the island. That's what we need for backup. Because Fox Islands wind is not a backup, and the market is not a backup when we don't have our transmission line. So this is where battery storage comes in. If we had a 2 megawatt, 4 megawatt hour battery, we could pair that with our diesel generator and actually go quite a while, because we could pair them and split them off, diesel generator doing one island, battery doing another. On the shoulder months, it would last longer. We've also considered, or still considering, additional diesel generation. If we had another generator, maybe on North Haven, that we could combine them. It does trigger our air permit, our air pollution permit. And it's not something that we generally want to do, adding more fossil fuels in this climate, but it might be our only option. It might be one of the best options with the challenges we're facing. So maybe not our only option, but it's something that we need to investigate, because reliability needs to be there. And right now, we really only have that backup in the spring and the fall. And we need to be able to reliably provide power in the event of a mainland outage. And they're getting more and more frequently. I mean, we had a squirrel, and this last time they had a trip that they couldn't find. You know, it took them a while to find, but they also were dealing with a lot of damage, a lot of storm damage. And our switching station, our substation, was not the only problem that CMP had. So it took a significant amount of time. We were on our generator, I think, almost 11 hours. So it's these kinds of challenges that we need to look at for, you know, this is, again, when do we need the power? How much do we need? When do we need it? What kind of power? We also comes into that discussion.
Along those lines, and having, we've been talking about the fact that we've got decisions coming up. And I think, these discussions are great. But, I think of the person on the island, it basically comes down to choices. Do you choose to invest in island capacity, or do you put your marbles and expectations on the ISO New England grid? And the question, I mean, that's sort of gonna be the bottom line question moving forward. And so, I mean, how do we talk about reliability and cost for the ISO New England grid? I mean, that's a key part of the question. I mean, it's facing all the same stresses with expansion, and less reliable base power, all those good points. So how do we present this in a way that talks about both sides, both elements of the choice, really, that's going to be there? I mean, is there good forecasting on costs? Is there good reliability? I mean, you read a lot of apocalyptic stuff in the news.
Yeah.
And how much of that is real? How much of that should be basically, because I think there's a lot of people on this island who are just inherently suspicious that we can produce electricity on this island competitively. And so their instinct is to lean towards just relying on that cable, I think. And if that is a weaker choice for both reliability and cost, that's a really important piece for people to understand.
To summarize the comments, how do we go forward? How do we really look at the choices and decisions that we have to make on this island? We do really have the fork in the road. Is do we go back to being completely reliant on the energy market, the ISO New England mainland grid, using our transmission line for 100% of our power, or do we invest in more on-island generation, and can we do that competitively to the mainland, or is it somewhere in between, maybe? And as we are looking at an island, how do we put this into reliability terms, into responsibility terms, environmental? I always put it, actually, Doug is a great one that kind of coined this: reliability, responsibility, and affordability.
Yeah,
Right?
reliability, cost-effective power is what I think what you're talking about, Chuck. I mean,
I mean, the question is how can we bring into this conversation sort of boiled down expectations of what the ISO New England grid would do for us, or not do for us, if that's what it's.
but
I think. Oh, excuse me.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that is the next step of this conversation. We have looked historically, where are we? Where have we been? What are the different technologies that are available to this island? And today, what do we actually need? When do we need it? How do we fill it? I think the next step is looking at all of this. What plan strategically makes the best economic sense? And what are our options? And what do each of those options look like?
Can I answer that question? Chuck, you might want to consider the idea that, remember when we were kids, they had these big mainframes, right? If you'd have your own computer, you had to go to some place and dial into someone's computer. But now you've got a computer in your hand, right? And so you could explain to people the fact that we used to have to buy power on the mainland because you had to have a big generator, but now you can just buy a panel that costs $150 and you can generate electricity. In other words, the technology's changed so you can have a local computer for local power.
I don't think it's a technological question, and I'm thinking of a lot of people I know on this island who, first of all, are reluctant to believe that the windmills have been a competitive investment. That's a regarded suspicion, and so when we get to the crossroads of decisions have to be made, the question is, people are going to think, wouldn't we be better off just relying on ISO New England? Because don't they have things well in hand? It has nothing to do with technology, it's just cost and reliability.
But what are they doing? I mean, they're putting solar systems in and they're putting windmills, you have access to the same technology, except that you have to get access to their energy, you've got to go through a cable.
Mhm.
In other words, that's one way of looking at it.
No, and I'm trying to assure that we don't ignore an element of this island who's not here tonight and who holds high suspicions about all of these questions. And, I mean, I just drove past Beasley and saw that gorgeous natural gas generator that probably provides our peak power when we buy it. And I think that looks very reliable. I'm just, how do we represent the or in this conversation? I mean, we can talk a lot about heat pumps or, the battery storage and a solar project and repowering the windmills, but there's an or to it. And if we don't talk about the or, and I realize it's not a simple thing to do, but we have to find a way to characterize the or I think we're gonna lose a lot of people on this.
I think the paradigm has shifted in terms of, and your question's a good one, which is ISO New England versus self-generated power on the island. And I think you got to look at how reliable is ISO New England today for this island? How cost effective is it? We can't answer that, but I think tonight, but I think things have shifted from 10 years ago as demand on the grid has changed dramatically for ISO New England and the other national systems. So at the end of the day, I think people are going to want, as Amy said a few moments ago, we want reliable, cost effective, and power. When the lights, when the lights go off, you want your power. And I think that what we have to evaluate is what are the best options to ensure that reliability and cost-effective power is going to be available to this island, whether it's ISO New England, whether it's self-generated power, whether it's a combination of the two. But I think looking at ISO New England as a sole source of power, it may be a different, like I say, a different set of factors than it was 10 years ago, given the strain on ISO New England and demands it's being put under.
I think we have to acknowledge too the skepticism, like that is rightly earned when it comes to the wind turbines. There were a lot of assertions and promises that have simply not panned out. And I can look at the numbers and crunch the data, but that doesn't replace perception and having lived through it. I can tell you that overall, throughout the life of the turbines, we've had, it's been less expensive having the turbines than if we had just gone and just received power from the mainland. I can tell you that because I can look up the last over a decade or more of costs from ISO New England and I can tell you what was their average cost of power, what the ancillary service or transmission, line losses. I can put all of that stuff in, and then I can take all of our actual data and of what we actually paid, and I can compare all that. But that doesn't replace the skepticism going forward. Are we making the right decision, or are we just landing ourselves into another money pit? And I think as we evaluate both, what we have to keep in mind that on the mainland, there are a lot of first generation renewable projects going up. We have the option of repowering using existing infrastructure that this community is already invested in. The repowering will be more cost effective than a brand new wind power generation site. It's more cost effective to revamp and repower what we have than to put up something brand new. If we went to ISO New England, we're going to be paying power from a lot of brand new systems that are going in today. Where if we look at the costs, and this is all the data that we're pulling together and that we're going to be looking at, what is it going to cost us to use this, reuse our towers and repower What is it going to cost us to use that kind of like second generation, that repowering timeframe? And then when we are done, if we decide as a community to repower, at the end of that period, we're going to have to decide, do we want to do wind again? But it's going to be a whole new site, new turbines and everything. Or at that time, do we get mainland power and they're going to be entering into their repowering sites? What makes the most financial sense today might not make the most financial sense 10 years from now. It might not have made the most financial sense 10 years earlier. We've had a lot of issues with these turbines, a lot of promises and assertions and models that didn't pan out. But the raw data tells us that it wasn't financially a wrong decision. It just wasn't as good of a deal as we thought it was going to be. And those are two different conversations to have. But going forward, we have to look at this with what we know and what we can project, and then really look at the system, the ISO New England market, the transmission, what is going on there, and project some of the costs coming out there to try to figure out as best as we can through our glass ball, which way is the best, most cost effective, and then give all this information to the community and let the community decide. Because the skepticism does have to be addressed, I think, and people have a lot of different opinions about the wind turbines, and they're all valid, and it's all part of the community. We just have to decide the best way to go forward together. Yes, Marsha, and then I'll come
I
back.
think that in terms of public perception, it's very easy to understand a wind turbine and the issues with the wind turbine. When you look up and 2 out of the 3 are running in the third minute.
That's true.
That is true. We have addressed that though.
Well, haven't got a clue what Iceland Windland is, much less pros and cons of going with either a big mix of Iceland Windland or, God forbid, being totally dependent. I personally, favor as much local generation as possible. And I don't know that much about Iceland Windland, but I have something. Yeah, I think anybody who thinks that that's an alternative wasn't here before we got the new cable. And the cable used to go out on a regular basis.
Remember that too?
You do and I do.
Yes.
You said you could generate the number that says that Fox Island supplied X amount of power over these years for X price, it would have cost Y. And I think if that figure was out there, well.
Yes, the December meeting, and this is probably what we need to revisit these costs. At the December meeting, we went through year by year. Here's what it costs us kilowatt hour from the mainland. Here's what it costs us from Fox Islands Wind. And we had to put it on an apples to apples basis, because on the mainland, I might be able to get a 10-cent kilowatt hour over there, but it's going to cost me 3 or 4 cents to get it over here. So delivery costs, to deliver it to your meter, what does each source cost us? And these are the numbers we came up with, and this is actual data. Through 2022, we're going to be updating this and revisiting it with the 2023, because 2023 was a rough year with our turbines. We had to do a lot of maintenance, and there were a lot of repairs, and there were a lot of issues that needed to be addressed on the turbines. Thankfully, all 3 are consistently running again, knock on wood. And I'm looking at preventative maintenance that needs to happen the first week in June when GE comes out to do the annual maintenance. I'm having them do top to bottom inspections, looking at issues, replacing things before they become an issue. A lot of maintenance activities on these turbines to keep them running. We are going to pay for them through the end of 2029, whether we get power or not. So it's in our best interest to get them running as well as they possibly can. Use this asset in the best way we can for this community. That's a different issue. One I'm very passionate about. These turbines, I'm going to do whatever we need to do to make them run as well as possible and make them cost efficient. But the blue line is the Fox Islands Wind. And the red is the ISO New England market power. you can see that there's different things that happen. In 2019, we had the gearbox failure on turbine 3. And that is where the significant cost went, skyrocketed. But and then 2020, the market power had COVID and natural gas costs started peaking. So we have these, for two totally different reasons, spikes in both of our sources of power from 2019, 2020 on. So as we go forward, we're really going to have to look, what are our costs? Where do we project both costs to be? But this is definitely something we should revisit at another meeting. Yeah, in the back.
4 megawatt solar landfill, what's the payback on that? What's the payback on the solar project? With the projected payback for the utility?
I'd have to go back and look at that again.
I know, I didn't bring
It's
that.
either 6 or 7 years, basically. But
Those panels last 30 years, right?
well, there's typically the warranties for panels are at least 20 and usually 30 years. But there's a degradation curve of actual generation with panels. They don't generate the same amount of power forever. They sort of wear out. There's no moving parts, but sort of the way they function, they generate less power. So typically you want to look at possibly replacing your panels in less than the warranty period, mainly because as technology improves, panel efficiency increases. So it might make, there's some place where the curve crosses, right? Where you have the generation versus the cost per watt means, hey, maybe I should dump these old panels that are only 200 watt panels because the new ones are 600 watt panels. But they don't cost 3 times what these did. So there's a whole bunch of, it's the same thing of deciding when to repower your boat. You know, I mean, it's really, I buy a brand new boat, it gets me out further, it's more efficient. But after 10 to 15 years, you've been doing maintenance on it. At some point, you've got too many hours on that engine, and you've got to decide, am I going to get rid of the boat? Am I going to repower it? Or am I going to get out of fishing altogether? And that's really the choices that we're looking at. And I don't know how any other way to put it that makes sense, that we have to make a decision on whether reinvesting to give a boost to what we're generating makes the most sense economically. And I think what we're going to need to do is have sort of a greatest hits slideshow or some for everybody that says, okay, this has got to be on the greatest hits, I think. But there's others that are showing, here's what we're facing and here's what our options are, and boil down these last several months of, presentation, but encourage people. I know not everybody wants to do this, but we have laid out an incredible amount of information, and trying to get more people to look at and absorb some of that. We're just going to have to keep repeating, and providing clear messages to folks.
I'll just throw a wild card question out there. And this is what, through our business model, blew it out of the water in 5 years. If we do a project on the island, no matter, I don't care what it looks like, is there anything we can do to eliminate lawsuits in that project? And I asked any lawyer this question, so they can't have any lawsuits against it.
I am an attorney by trade.
Go ahead.
I do not represent Fox Islands Electric, and I'm not a practicing licensed attorney in Maine. But I can generally say that there is no way to ever insulate yourself from lawsuits, no matter what you do in your entire life in any area.
Well, we're speaking of America. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there is, when we did this original, and of course I wasn't here, so I say we generally, when this original project went forward, there was some pressure to get them done quicker. I think when we take this process, if we repower, if this community decides to vote to repower to go forward, there's a lot of analysis in the permits that need to be done ahead of time to really look at this. So for example, I know because I've dug into the new equipment that the the nacelles are fully insulated and the blades are more efficient and quieter as they go. Have we done a sound study? No. Do we need to do sound studies? Yes. Do we need to look at all of these options? Yes. Do we have to be fully prepared and have all the data going forward ahead of time and not be retroactively looking at these things? Yes. We need to go through the entire process effectively and do that. And there's no way to insulate against lawsuits, but you do have to go through and do all the preliminary work and take all of the steps and have it be a very open public process where all questions can be asked and addressed and looked at ahead of time.
Can the Fox on electric board ask questions to the public after all the information is in, all what you said is done, all the analysis there? At the annual meeting, is anyone out there? Do you think you might want to sue us? Please say yes or no before we go forward and spend more money here. Can that question be asked? I know.
We can.
I'm Don Quixote. I'm doing this with me.
No, we can, and we absolutely, if there is litigation on this, we're going to manage it much better than we did the first time. There's definitely
It would be,
there.
we could have a heads up. Very so.
You know, there's so much that you don't know, but going through the process and taking all the steps and having the public informed. And again, this is a community decision. I think I am committed, this board is committed to doing anything that we do in this community in a very open public forum where questions and concerns can be addressed. And that doesn't ever prevent anyone from suing us. But we will make sure that we're doing things in the regulatory arena and the legal arena the way we should. That's all I can say. So there is a question online, how much power is lost in transmission through the rest of the system, like lines, transformers, etc. This is a question that we have not had the technology to answer immediately. We have replaced our metering system, so now I actually can track it from the substation feeders to the houses. So that's something that we're starting to do. 4 years ago when I came, one of the first things I did was equipment reviews. We've replaced rusty transformers. We've cut about 1.5% of our line losses from on island, which actually saved us a significant amount of money. Yes, so decreasing that overall line loss, I think our online, it's probably right around 1 to 1.5% is in the distribution system of our line losses. It's fairly low, and we're addressing issues that will even decrease it more through vegetation management and equipment replacements and different maintenance activities that we've done on islands. But overall, we have about 11.5% line loss. The majority of that's our transmission system. Okay. I'm going to kind of wrap this up a little bit. Are there any other questions? Not that I'm rushing. Yes.
George, you alluded earlier to limitations on selling power. What are those limitations?
Okay, I'm trying to rewind what I said.
Yeah, there was a graph up there that showed excess production in the spring.
Oh, okay. So that, again, that was on a monthly view, but we really need to look on an hour by hour basis, because that's how pricing happens on the mainland, or minute by minute, is it?
Pretty much hour by hour.
So if we look at the month of January and we're generating an incredible amount of power with the wind, it might only be happening at night. And so if we need to sell that power at night, that might be an off-peak time, and the price that we could get for that power might be quite low. But we have all this extra power, so what are we going to do with it? Well, if we could stick it in a battery and then save it until the next evening at 5 or 6 o'clock, when the power prices on the mainland are very high, we'd get more money for it. So it really has more to do with the management of those electrons. Where do we store them and when do we move them around? right now, we have no choice, but to you generate it, you sell it. And we are at the mercy of the market depending on what time of day we generate that power. So that's the limitation really is in how much revenue can we get for that power we generate. And if we can figure out strategies to generate more power during peak time or store power to use at peak time, that's the way we can solve that revenue problem.
And we don't want to, if we decide the on-island generation is what we want to do, we don't want to overbuild because you can't get the revenue for selling that power to the mainland, and it's never going to fill that gap. Like if that chart where we just have that high summer peak, if you design your whole system for that, then you're overspending the rest of the year to provide the system. So it all has to be in balance. You need enough generation for the majority of your system, and then a way to store it and do some energy triage and storing and delivering and using the market as a tool to be able to fully supply without overbuilding, which would be, again, it would just drive up the prices and be too expensive for our system.
Is energy triage done by a computer or a person?
The question is whether the triage is done by a computer or a person.
Yes, both actually.
Good answer.
Yes, there are control systems. If you ever have a chance to go into a control room, visit a control room at a large utility, it's fascinating. I mean, the amount of computers and people who are just looking up at all of these computers and watching everything. If we had a large scale battery, it would be connected to a SCADA type system. And we would probably contract out the services to monitor the energy that's on the mainland with the energy that's on our load and how to use that. But the battery could be generally programmed to supply power during the peak time each day. But you would want to have someone monitoring all that so they knew when the appropriate time to charge it versus discharge it, and how to sell power on the island versus keep it and store it. And so it's some of both. Some of the models have shown that we'll save just as much with a battery, even if we just had it on a schedule as it costs. So if we had it scheduled charging at the same time and then discharging at the same time, we could still save enough money to purchase the battery, but not enough to make it really a cost-effective, financially feasible option for our islands. So you really do want, there are ingenious, fascinating people that do this work, but it does rely on computers. Yeah.
Going back to that 38% increase that I saw New England is going to be charging 2025?
2026.
2026.
2028. Mm-hmm.
If we were totally dependent on that cable and getting all of our electricity from them, we would have a 38% increase or more, right? Because of the transmission?
Well, it would depend on how much energy we were using during the peak hour of the year.
Okay.
And then that cost would be allocated toward us. So the costs as a whole are increasing that much in the capacity market in a couple of years. So really right now, the current wind turbines are expected to generate through to 2030. Our maintenance plans and everything, there are all kinds of different models, like George was saying, that it could be feasible if the community wanted to repower them earlier, that it might be financially beneficial to do it earlier. But that is what our target is, because that's when our loan is fully paid off for those turbines. So how much wind is generating, how much generation is on island during that peak time in 2025, that peak hour is going to determine how much of that increase we get in 2026.
So what I'm asking though are like 3 different scenarios. If we just
completely go
and just get all of our electricity from the mainland,
yes,
we would have a 38% increase or more, right? Because of the transmission?
Probably 38 or less, depending on how much energy we're using at that moment from the mainland at that hour.
But see, that's
But
the
it-
capacity charge.
Yeah, that's the
It's
capacity.
not the,
Yeah.
not the per kilowatt hour rate that we're all paying.
No, the transmission rate is going up too, but that's a different, I didn't bring those costs to. The transmission is the kilowatt hour, how much you're using the transmission, where the delivery point is and what time of the day it's being delivered.
So then if
So-
we kept our situation as it is with the wind power, what I'm trying to get are like three different scenarios. If we were totally dependent on the mainland, a situation like we're at now, or repowering and adding solar. I mean, would that 38% change or not because it's capacity?
So I think you're asking exactly where we're heading in the future.
Okay.
Because we're getting all of those costs. We have to forecast what each of those pieces, power from the mainland, the market power, market transmission, market ancillary services, and market capacity. What would those costs be 100% in the future if we just went that way versus what we have now if we repowered the turbines, what we have now if we just added the solar, what we have now if we just added a battery. Like, what are all these components going to cost, and how is that going to translate, and how is it going to compare? And it's a lot of data that we're digging through right now. So I don't have the answer for you yet, but that's where we're heading. That's what we're trying to figure all of these little pieces out to get the actual cost.
Is the simple answer to that question, I think you said that right now we spend approximately $60 per customer. Per
Just
year,
for capacity.
just to be part of the system, and that $60 per year fee, we can expect to increase by 38%. Did I understand that?
Yes, it's just that one small component.
Right.
And if we use the exact same percentage during the peak time, percentage of the system, we could expect that one little component to increase that much if all of the other factors stayed the same. Yeah.
We would all sit in the dark during the peak period.
Yes.
It was going zero.
Actually,
If
I
we know
thought
when
about
it is,
that.
Everybody turn
Yes.
on.
The problem with your peak is you don't know when it's gonna happen. I would have never guessed.
You know when it's gonna happen.
I could turn everybody off every day. I could just say we're going back to the old power hours, except for that. Yeah, nobody gets power from 5 to 8, ever. And if I did that, that would solve that. But I would have never guessed September would be our peak. You don't know it until after it's over. So it's really, we could have a January peak with some of these storms and things that have happened. It could be a January and we would never use as much energy the rest of the year as we did that 1 hour in January. You just don't know. So yeah, the option is to turn everyone off every day during peak time. It's all options are on the table. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding with that one. Yes, questions back there?
I think, what people need to know about ISO could probably be shown on a chart of their rates for electricity, not the, what do you call it, the connection chart, basically. That's what people really have to see it, because that peak we had when the price of natural gas was sky high, and ISO was heavily dependent on natural gas. If we go exclusively with them, we're subject to those ups and downs.
We are.
And I don't know if there's enough new renewable capacity, wind and solar coming on in ISO in general to start seeing that out. But we are very much at the mercy of what has historically been very volatile prices. And I think that's the kind of information people in the town need to know, because you can see the wind turbines and you can complain about them. You can't see what's happening in ISO, you can't see directly the cost of electricity generated with natural gas when prices were very high.
Right.
Yeah, the comment is there's a lot of volatility with natural gas prices, and you can't necessarily see that with ISO New England in the energy market. The energy market is about 65% natural gas. So we are subject to the volatility of gas prices. Natural gas prices have come down a little bit. There was a lot of speculation during COVID, short market supply, then hedging at higher costs that kind of drug out that higher cost for a while. The natural gas prices are coming down. And that is something that happened when we started planning the original project. Natural gas prices and coal prices were very high. And then natural gas kind of flooded the New England market, and that energy price came way down, but our Fox Islands wind price didn't. And I think if we go back to this, one promise that was made at the beginning of this project that I think has actually panned out very well is that the Fox Islands wind turbines would stabilize energy costs. And if you look at this, there is a bump early on from 2011 to 2015 that was primarily due to legal costs. Just not commenting on the litigation, but that little swoop there, that's legal costs. And then you can see it's pretty stabilized. 2017, there's a bump that was mostly related to insurance costs. And then 2019, when we had the gearbox failure, our insurance cost increased $50,000 the next year. It's very, very significant. Insurance costs went through the roof, and now it's economically infeasible to even insure them anymore. It is a big problem that the board and the company is dealing with. But the cost of repairs and the insurance costs and then the supply chain and not being able to get parts, so dealing with extended outages that we have really increased the wind costs. But prior to that, the wind turbines did stabilize out power costs for this region, where you see much more volatility in the market. So I think that is something we need to look at too. But that's also something that makes this incredibly difficult to forecast what's going to happen in the next 20 years. We're doing our best as we really look at each element of these rates and where we think that costs are going, but it's an incredibly difficult thing. But we do know that the wind turbines, with a new take on maintenance and preventative maintenance and how we operate them, can go a long way in stabilizing energy prices. That's one thing that I think was definitely proven correct through this. So it is definitely time to wrap this up. I want to say thank you so much for coming. This is great. This is a summary of everything that we talked about so far, and also a basis for our discussions going forward. We're going to be bringing in a lot of that data that we've talked about. We're going to update stuff for 2023 data that we have. We have audited numbers for that now. May 20th, we are going to be right back here. We're going to talk about the wind power option and really focusing on the wind turbines and wind power in general. On June 25th, we're going to be over at the North Haven Historical Society. We haven't had an opportunity yet to host some meetings over there, so we're going to do that this summer. And also, it's not on the slide, but on July 15th, we have our annual meeting of the members with Fox Islands Electric and Fox Islands Wind, and it's over in Waterman in North Haven this year. And then June 18th, the Vinyl Haven Land Trust, we are going to do a tour of Fox Islands Wind sites. If you haven't been up there and would like to come, it's a great opportunity. And then Fox Islands Wind and Fox Islands Electric are going to do a similar tour on July 3rd. Right before the holiday, we figure there might be some people that come seasonally that would be available then to tour the wind farm site as well. So thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you in the future. Take care.
Hey.